Hello, graphic novel literature students. Welcome to the video for week 4, day 2. This video is for those students who are absent from our live Zoom class. As a reminder, everything you say, do, or type is recorded, so please remember to keep it school appropriate. And as always, there's no saving, downloading, or taking pictures of our class ever. Our agenda for today is we're going to read chapter 7 and a summary of chapter 8 and then fill in the vocab. It says, but do not submit yet because there's still one more chapter with a vocab term in there. I'll talk about that later. I'm going to go over the comic from a comic activity Rebirth. And then your homework for this weekend will be to read chapter 9 and work on that comic from a comic activity Rebirth. I'll go into more details later. So you'll need to kind of set up your stuff, or you'll want to do this because you're doing this individually if you're watching this video, right? Have your lit terms on one side and then the PDF in the other. We left off on page 161, right? As a class, we all read chapter 7. While we were reading chapter 7, we were looking for these words, or the 6 steps on your vocab sheet: idea, form, idiom, structure, craft, and surface. Okay, so all of those terms come up in chapter 7, which is about those 6 steps. I would suggest you kind of pause the video here and read chapter 7 before moving on, because I'm about to go over the summary of chapter 8. So please pause the video here, read chapter 7, and when you're ready, hit resume. Okay, so looking at chapter 8, right, we didn't read the entire chapter, we just read just select panels. So I'm going to read through that with you now very quickly. Right. So chapter 8 is titled A Word About Color. In chapter 5, we dealt with the expressionistic potential of lines, and it as anticipated by artists at the turn of the century. But of course, it was color which most captivated artists of that era. Throughout art history, color has been a powerful, even predominant concern of fine artists everywhere. Some, like Georges Seurat, devoted their lives to its study. If you've ever seen this painting in color, it's the one that's comprised of all single colored dots, right? A whole bunch of these dots, when you look at it from far away, it looks like this image, but when you get very close up, it looks like the same kind of dots you see here in the red. Others, like Kandinsky, believed that colors could have profound physical and emotional effects on people. And this guy's kind of shaking. These yellow walls make me uncomfortable, Mary. Color can be a formidable ally for artists in any visual medium. Yet in comics, the career of color has been, well, a bit spotty. There are many reasons for the stormy relationship between comics and color, but most can be summed up in 2 words: commerce and technology. Now, all aspects of comics history have been affected by commerce. Money has a tremendous effect on what is and isn't seen, but color in comics has always been unusually sensitive to the shifting tides of technology. The technology of color reproduction was first anticipated in 1861 when Scottish physicist Sir James Clerk Maxwell isolated what we now call the 3 additive primaries: red, blue, and green. These colors, cyan, magenta, and yellow, can also mix to produce any hue in the visible spectrum, right? Cyan and magenta mix together to make a purple color, right? Then you've got cyan and yellow for green, et cetera, et cetera. But rather than adding light, these 3 do it by filtering light out. This subtractive effect was achieved through transparent substances such as cellophane, colored glass, watercolors, or printer's ink. Color comics hit the newspaper industry like an atomic bomb. Color boosted sales, but it also boosted costs. Measures were taken to streamline and make it more cost effective. Notice that as the color goes up, the money also goes up. And the standard quote unquote four color process took over. This process restricted the intensity of the three primaries to 100%, 50%, and 20% using black ink for the line work. The look of these colors, held by bold, simple outlines and reproduced on cheap newsprint, eventually became the look of comics in America. To counteract the dueling effect of newsprint and the stand out from the competition, costumed heroes were clad in bright primary colors and fought in a bright primary world. The colors were picked for strength and contrasted strongly with one another. But on most pages, no one color dominated. Without the emotional impact of single color saturation, the expressive potential of American color comics was often canceled out to an emotional gray. As always, there were some exceptions, but this was the overall trend. Another way of saying it, right, is even though this is a very bright and vibrant scene, all you get is just bright colors. There's no way with the color palette that we have here to really kind of convey the mood of like, are these people, is this a moment of joy for the figures in blue, right? How would you do that if all you can use is sadness for these figures? How would you do that if all you have is bright colors? However, while comics' color were less than expressionistic, they were fixed with a new iconic power. Because costume colors remained exactly the same, panel after panel, they came to symbolize characters in the mind of the reader. For example, when you think of Batman, you probably think of blue, yellow, and gray. When you think of the Hulk, you think of green, maybe this like purplish, magenta, pinkish color, and other forms of green. Many see the superhero as a form of modern mythology. If so, this aspect of color may play a part. Symbols are the stuff of which gods are made. Again, using Superman as a symbol here as well, and an example. Whenever we think of Superman, we think of three colors: blue, red, and yellow. In Europe, Hergé captured the magic of such flat colors with unprecedented subtlety. Right, this is Nora's room, that ravishing. He's still using those same colors that we saw in the American comics, right? But he uses it very differently. Hergé's created a kind of democracy of form in which no shape has any less important than any other. A completely objective world. Comics printing was superior in Europe, and for Hergé, flat colors were a preference, not a necessity. But others, such as Clairvaux, Cazat, and Mobius, saw in their superior printing an opportunity to express themselves through a more intense, subjective palette. Some of this work began reaching America in the 1970s, inspiring many young artists to look beyond their four-colored walls. Suddenly, it seemed possible for color to take on a central role. Colors could express a dominant mood. Tones and modeling could add depth. Whole scenes could be virtually about color. Color as sensation, color as environment, color as color. Since the late 70s, more and more quote-unquote upscale color projects have begun appearing in America. Some publishers at the beginning tried applying the traditional four-color process to better paper with garish results. Take that. When modeling and more subtle hues were applied, though, they seemed out of place on the old shape-sensitive line drawings. Again, still take that, but doesn't look quite as nice as the old comics. The surface was changing, but not the core. For all their subtle hues, comics were still being written in primary colors. Unfortunately, color is still an expensive option and has historically been in the hands of larger, more conservative publishers. This is beginning to change as I write this, but it's still the exception, not the rule. Comic artists wanting to conduct bold new experiments in comic art still have to learn, in most cases, to be bold in black and white. The differences between black and white and color comics are vast and profound, affecting every level of the reading experience. In black and white, the ideas behind the art are communicated more directly. Meaning transcends form. Art approaches language. In flat colors, forms themselves take on more significance. The world becomes a playground of shapes and space. And through more expressive colors, comics can become an intoxicating environment of sensations that only color can give. The surface qualities of color will continue to attract readers more easily than black and white, and the story of color will no doubt continue to be intertwined with the forges of commerce and technology. We live in a world of colors, not just black and white. Color comics will always seem more quote-unquote real at first glance. But comic readers look for many things besides reality, and technology notwithstanding, color will never replace black and white entirely. One thing's for sure though, when used well, color in comics can, like comics itself, amount to far more than the sum of its parts. If you recognize this painting by Vincent van Gogh, right? If you were to be able to look at this very closely, as you are like zoomed in, then it zooms out here, right? Every single part of this picture is comprised of single brushstrokes, right? Like thousands of them. And when you put them all together, they form this image, right? Amounting to more than the sum of its parts, right? It's not just a whole bunch of brushstrokes. It's a self-portrait. Okay, and that's the end of chapter 8 on color. Let's talk about your homework this weekend and your work for next week. So your homework is to read chapter 9. The definition of realism is in that chapter, so make sure you add that to your definition sheet. And then submit your vocab sheet before midnight on Sunday the 28th. Your other thing that you could be doing is begin thinking about your next comic from a comic assignment, right? Which isn't due until Wednesday of next week. And we'll be using day 1 of class to work on this activity. But I want to preview it for you now so you can begin thinking about what you want to use. So comic from a comic directions, rebirth. Right? Your goal is to construct a 16-panel summary of key ideas from chapters 3 to 9 of Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. Your requirements, right? It must be 16 panels. You can make more panels if you'd like, right? But you can't make fewer. You must use at least 8 vocabulary terms from chapters 3 to 9. You must use at least 2 unique images, right? So images not taken from McCloud's text. You must use info from chapters 3 to 9, right? I shouldn't see stuff from chapters 1 and 2. And at least 2 of your panels should summarize the ideas in chapter 9 and give the definition for realism. Right? So realism is going to be one of those 8 vocabulary terms. The other 7 are up to you, depending on what you think is the most important for somebody to know. Your formatting options are the same as before, right? You can recreate the same panels that McCloud uses and just order them appropriately with your own explanations as your summary. But remember, 2 of those need to be unique, right? Something that don't come from his book. Or you could just make something up completely original, right? Draw your own comic. Take a whole bunch of different images from the internet, right? Of different comics, etc., that illustrate the points he's trying to make. Again, the choice is completely up to you, and you don't have to do one or the other. You can always do a combination of the 2. Right, your panels will look like this, right? They're similar to what we worked with before, right? And there's 8 on one page and 8 on the other, forming 16. I have hyperlinked the short Kami video on how to take images from the internet and put them into the PDF for this assignment as well. And that's directly below this video that you're currently watching. So if you need that refresher, please watch that video. And just a very quick visual, right? This was my old version, right, where I took every single thing from McLeod's text. But this is what it would look like if I added in, an image that I found on the internet that also kind of communicates the same idea that McLeod was talking about. Okay. And again, my samples are coming from the first 2 chapters of the book, but all of your work should be coming from chapters 3 to 9. Okay. And so again, the last thing, right, is the action items that you have is to make sure you read chapter 9, get that definition for realism added to your sheet and then submit your vocab sheet before midnight on Sunday. And then use some time to start brainstorming, what you want your 8 terms to be, what panels do you think you might use, etc. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in class next week.